Hey, everybody, it's Peter Murphy here with the Buying Tampa Bay podcast. We've just started our Pro Series where we're interviewing some of the people you'll meet on your road to buying and investing in real estate. Last week, we talked with Kyle Edwards. He's a mortgage pro. It was a great episode. If you haven't listened to it already, go ahead and do listen to it. It was really something. This week, we're chatting with JB Brown with Buyer's Guide Home Inspections. JB is an experienced home inspector with years of experience in helping buyers identify potential problems in their acquisitions. And I think that's such an important diligence step in the process of buying a home. Its significance can't really be overstated as far as I'm concerned. So we're delighted to have JB on the show with us this morning. So welcome to Buying Tampa Bay, JB, and tell us a little bit about yourself, personal and professional. We like to know about the whole man here at Buying Tampa Bay. So fill us in a little bit.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be involved and share a little bit about what I do and how I can help the Tampa Bay real estate investors and those involved in the real estate market. So we moved to Florida back in 2018. We live in the Seffner area. My wife, Carrie, and two kids live here. So in 2018, my wife got offered the job as the head volleyball coach at Florida College, and we took that opportunity. I left a really good paying corporate type job in Knoxville, Tennessee, to move down here so she could pursue that. And we came down. I quit that job. I was not happy in the role, and we moved down. I had no job prospects. So it was a big change, a big financial change. When we moved down, I took a few odd jobs here and there and lived off of savings for quite a while. But in 2011 in Kentucky, I started a consulting firm in the field that I was in, consulting for industry and helping them with their environmental and safety compliance. And at that time, when I started that business, I also got licensed as a home inspector to kind of supplement that income until that consulting gig really got rolling. I had one of my best friends in Kentucky was a home inspector, and I shadowed him a lot and got some good ideas, and actually worked with him doing a few jobs, a few home inspections in Kentucky as I rolled up my consulting business. That consulting business really took off, and I didn't need the home inspection side of it. So I let that license expire after 2 years. But when we moved down here, I started looking into my options, and my education and my previous license in Kentucky basically transferred down. So I applied for my home inspector license in 2019. And became licensed as a Florida home inspector. I went to work for a company in Clearwater for about 2 years as an employee inspector. And then in October of 2020, right in the height of the pandemic, I separated from that company and started Buyer's Guide Home Inspection. And here we are.
Yeah, it's a great story. Yeah. And welcome this morning, JB. You got a lovely family, and glad to work with you guys professionally. I think when it comes to home inspections, a lot of people may not even know what role does a home inspector play in the process of purchasing a property. It's like you got so many things going on. There's so many costs. I have some buyers that I say, hey, you need to get a home inspection. They're like, well, how much does that cost? And I tell them, and they're like, oh, do I really need that? Like, why do I need to hire a home inspector if I'm looking to buy a property?
That's a good question. So the home inspector comes in after the purchase contract is made and signed. Usually in those purchase contracts, there is an inspection period, which could be from 3 to 15 days. So after that purchase contract is made, the buyer can contact a home inspector if they choose and set that up. So what a home inspector does is goes into that home and looks for defects and describes some of the features of the home, so that purchaser can have a snapshot of the condition of the home so they know what they're buying and know what they're getting into, and maybe look, they can prepare for any potential costs that they'll incur from those defects or systems that are old and need to be replaced, and could potentially even negotiate with that seller to get some credits or get some repairs made.
So JB, you use an interesting way to describe that, and so I've brokered purchases for buyers in the past, and I have viewed the role of a home inspector maybe not quite as describing a home's features, more looking for problems, right? I tell my buyers to go find a home inspector, get a home inspector to help them find whatever problems might be hidden under the nice new paint job, or help them kick the tires if they're not sophisticated. But you talked about describing home features. Is there a difference?
Oh, there's absolutely a difference. So a lot of it has to do with age and construction styles when that home was built. Florida homes are known, and it's very common to have stucco. In modern homes, newer homes, older homes in the Florida area, like in Tampa and the Seminole Heights area, and any of those homes that are older than maybe 60 years old, they're going to be wood frame homes, as opposed to the block construction you see in modern homes. So that's a big difference, and you're going to want to know that what the construction materials are in those walls, whether they're wood frame or block. There's different types of roof covering. So most common roof covering in our area is multi-dimensional shingles, but you also see lots of modified bitumen flat roof, lots of and some tile roofs, and all those different types of roof can have different issues, different lifespans, different things you're going to want to know. And a home inspector can point out those features, those different types of features, and tell you the benefits and the lifespans and potential problems.
Okay, that's very helpful then. So view this more then as kind of like a narrative, a story about what your home is, than just a list of possible repairs you're going to have to make when you move in. That would be the way that you would approach reading a home inspection as a buyer. Is that probably correct?
Exactly. So when you receive your home inspection report from me or any other inspector, it's going to be a 40-page document. And there's going to be lots of things to look at, but you'll have your list of defects, but you also have your list of characteristics of the home. And a good home inspector is going to go over the different types of materials, building materials that you have. If you're not experienced, you haven't bought multiple homes, you may not know the difference. If you're a buyer and you're buying a 3,000 square foot home with a tile roof, and you see that the tile roof is 20 years old, you may think it's near the end of its life, but oftentimes that tile roof can go way more than that 20 years. So it's good to have that conversation with the home inspector about the attributes that are good and bad of the home you're buying.
Yeah, because ultimately, right, I mean, the features of the home are what determine its actual value. Right. If you've got a nice stucco facade on a house and you think you've got a block home and there's concrete block behind that stucco, and you find out, oh no, it's wood frame and maybe it's not even insulated correctly, that's going to be a significant deduction in value for you in that home, correct?
Absolutely. If you're buying a 90, 100-year-old home, and it's stuccoed, it looks like the modern homes you've looked at in the past few months as you're going through your buying process, and you don't realize that's a wood frame home, that could mean significant costs going forward. When you're talking about wood frame home versus block, termites is the big concern. So, and like you mentioned, with insurance and efficiency is a big difference too.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people don't understand the inherent value and different features of homes, and so having an inspection done is important. So what kind of investment is somebody going to make in a home inspection? Having someone like you come out and do a really thorough, walkthrough of the home, what does that typically cost? And, how should they view that from an investment standpoint?
So when you think about the investments, the money you're spending up front when you're buying a home, the home inspection is probably the best deal you're getting. So when you're buying a home, you're paying for an appraisal. You're paying your lender a certain fee. You're paying your real estate agent a commission on that house. The average home inspection fee in our area is like between $300 and $500. So if you think about all that investment versus the potential savings you're going to get out of identifying significant defects, it's huge. And I tell people that $300 to $500 fee you're paying can save you tons of money down the road. So for instance, if you're a first-time home buyer and you think you're going to save $300 to $500 and skip the home inspection, that may be okay on new homes. And we can talk about the importance of having a home inspection on a new home too. But just there's very few times I do a home inspection I don't find defects, and the costs associated with those defects wouldn't cover my home inspection fee.
Yeah. So for instance, like I've had a deal before, just to kind of highlight a real life scenario there, where you go into a home and none of the electrical outlets are properly grounded, right? My home inspector uncovered that. And that would have cost me, had I closed on that home, that would have cost me what, $500-600 at least for somebody to come in and fix that issue, whether it was replacing outlets. If we had to do home runs from the electrical panel, now we're talking several $1,000s plus drywall or plaster repair to get that corrected. And because I knew that up front, I was able to negotiate that into the purchase price. Yeah, I think in that case, I got a price reduction so that I could go and do it myself later. But quite often, those are the kind of things an inspector will find where you can force the seller to do it, you know, because it's not going to pass a 4-point for the insurance company, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's tons of value there, at least from my perspective as both a home buyer and an investor, you know, and things that home inspectors can do for you. You're not going to hit a home run every time on your investment in an inspection. The home may end up being in perfect shape, and you're like, oh man, why did I hire an inspector to come out there? But 9 times out of 10, there is something that you're going to want to know about. So yeah, good advice on that.
JB, I know that we advise our residential buyers to use a home inspector, but do you also work a lot with investors? And, you know, what do you find is a difference in the way that investors approach the home inspection process than an owner-occupant buyer if they're using you? How do those two approaches differ?
Okay, so I work with quite a few investor clients, and it's funny how I've met these clients and got involved with them. All of my investor clients that are regular customers of mine came to me because I inspected a home they had flipped and sold. So they most of these investors, these flippers, they didn't do a home inspection when they bought the house. They did everything. They candy coated the inside like we see with nice new vinyl plank tile and paint and new cabinets, new countertops and all that. And then I inspected that home for my client and just came up with a litany of significant defects. So these investors now, I've educated them. So they know when they're looking at a home before they go under contract, the types of things, big things that are going to be problems for them when they flip or when they go to rent. So they've been educated on what to look for, what they're going to need to fix, and they'll know those costs to add into that, what they're going to spend on after they purchase that home on repairs. And they can also go to those sellers when they're looking to purchase those homes and get the credits and get the potential repairs. So as an investor, the $300 to $500 fee is critical. If you don't get that investment, you run upon a roof that's leaking, or the roof that's old, or galvanized water supply piping that's clogged up and needs to be replaced, or aluminum wiring, or an old defunct electrical panel. Those are all going to be significant costs that you're definitely going to want to pay that $500 to get identified before you go through with that purchase.
Yeah, that's good. And you know, investors are interesting from that mindset because, you know, they're always looking to cut costs and pinch pennies and things like that. But these are just some of the lessons that you learn, especially throughout the course of flipping, because you will pay the price on the back end if you go to sell that house retail, because that buyer is going to have an inspector come in. They rip that thing apart. and you haven't really taken care of the critical components, it's going to cost you a lot more money than it would have if you had just done it as part of the rehab. And so we've learned that. We've helped our clients, learn that lesson too. And we always advocate for, anybody that's buying a property, whether to rent or flip, it's a great idea to get an inspection done up front. Whether it's because you want to know for the retail side when you go to flip it, or because you want to know what you're actually paying for. And if you need to go back to the seller now that you're buying it from and get a reduction, a discount, or make requests for repair. So yeah, great advice on that front.
Well, it makes me though want to ask the question, because I think we probably all have heard stories where an inspector has missed something, right? Or there was something that was obvious to everyone after the fact, as they always are, right? Everything is obvious after the fact, but that, everyone feels like the inspector should have gotten, right? And so talk about that real quick. How often does that actually happen where you go into, houses are super complex, right? Lots of different parts, lots of opportunities to hide things behind walls that you can't really see. And you, even as an inspector probably can't see all of those. So talk to us about whether you miss things, how do things get missed? How problematic and how commonplace is that really? Should we even be too concerned about that? Tell us whatever you want to tell us about that whole process.
So that's a sticky conversation to have. My goal is to not miss the big things. My goal is not to miss any defects, but the clients are typically not concerned about cosmetic things. And I'll go back to the standard operating procedure that home inspectors follow. The standard says that we should identify all defects that are significantly deficient. So if there's a nick in the drywall, or if there's other cosmetic things, we're not generally going to put those into our report. We may have a verbal conversation about those after the inspection. But a home inspection has limitations. There's certain systems of a home that are excluded, like sprinkler systems can be excluded, alarm systems, low voltage, outdoor lighting, other systems like that. And a home inspection is a visual inspection only. Home inspectors are not required to disassemble complex equipment, things like that. But sometimes homes can, and then sellers can hide things. That does happen. Homes can be really over furnished and have way too many belongings in there to where things just can't be seen. Windows can be blocked. Outlets and electrical panels can be blocked. Faulty plumbing can be covered up. Chase, I think you and I talked about an instance where maybe a home had old cast iron drain piping, and out in the yard you'll see a PVC standpipe with a clean out in it, where they only replace that clean out to give the impression that the drain piping has been replaced. So in summary, that misses do happen, and we do our best to not miss anything, obviously. But we're gonna take extra care in evaluating the big systems of the home: the roof, the structural components, the electrical, and the plumbing. So the misses that do happen are generally, in my case anyway, things that couldn't have been seen, that clients, their expectations are off as far as the scope of the inspection goes, and those can generally be worked out. But in my case, so probably my biggest miss was a water heater that was not plumbed properly. And in that case, I took care of it for that client. I actually went over there and fixed it myself. So those situations are rare, but in my case, I try to resolve those as quickly and as fairly as possible.
Yeah, and that's where your team comes into play, right? Whether you're an investor buying a property or you're a first-time home buyer or buying it as an owner-occupant, the experience of your real estate agent can be really important there too. Because a lot of times I'll look as an agent representing a buyer, I'll look at a home inspection report and I'll skim through what the inspector says. And like you said, a lot of times, they're not sending a camera down the drain pipes to see what's down there. They're not climbing into the attic and running a camera down the walls to see, where does the aluminum wire stop and the Romex pick up, or all that kind of stuff that you can't see. That's not a visual inspection, right? And so what I recommend to my buyers all the time is, look, if you're buying a 1960s house and we're not sure about the plumbing, you need to get a plumber out there with a camera and run it down the drain. That's going to be another $350. But let me tell you, it's a $350 investment in a plumber and a camera that could save you $3,500 down the line from having to replace the main line. So there's a lot of stuff like that you can't just solely rely on the inspector to tell you every single thing about the house. You've got to have that whole well-rounded team with experienced realtor, a good home inspector, and together kind of figure out what makes sense for that particular property.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chase. And I'm thinking about this story right now of a buyer who bought a house where there were drainage problems at the site. And if everyone had looked closely enough in the garage, right? The garage is notoriously cluttered, as you described, JB, right? You got shelves, you got cars, you got junk against the walls, but they would have observed a high water line inside that concrete block inside the garage behind some of that junk, which would have indicated there was some kind of, at one time, water flow actually standing in the garage. But instead what happened was when rainy season hit, they observed that water flow did not happen nicely away from the property. The correct swolls weren't there. I think it might have been missing some gutters. I think it might have been thickly clayed soil. I mean, things that were likely not anything deliberate on the part of the seller, in terms of like poor maintenance or anything, but just were the reality of where this house was built. And water during heavy rain seasons would flow a little bit into the garage and leave some standing water there. Now, of course, that's something that should have come up clearly on the seller's disclosure. They probably should have said, yeah, we've got water drainage issues and there has been water intrusion in our garage during heavy periods of rain. But everyone kind of fell back on the inspector and were like, inspector, you should have seen that problem, right? But that would have been a very hard problem to see, probably. And I'm not sure that even if you saw it, you would necessarily go right to the series of problems that needed to happen in order for that water retention issue to happen. So that's one of those kinds of cases where maybe easy to pin upon the home inspector, but far more complicated than just his oversight of an easy to observe problem, right?
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned the junk in the garage. It's a big issue, especially when it comes to, like you said, water infiltration. Ideally, the home will be empty. If the home's empty when I'm doing an inspection, it makes it so much easier. And the client really needs to have an expectation that the current conditions at the home can change. For instance, I did a home inspection in our area, Chase, in the Seffner area. Newer home, 20 years old maybe. The week after I did the home inspection, the tropical storm came through. We had whatever it was, 5 or 6 inches of rain, and water was coming through the exterior wall. The grading wasn't bad. The gutter wasn't bad. It was just one of those instances where an unforeseen circumstance happened, and the clients understood that, but the expectations of the buyer kind of need to be set through communication with that home inspector and the understanding what the scope of the home inspection is.
Yeah, and so because it is a visual inspection and because a home inspector can't dive deeply into all the details of what's going on, even when there possibly is, a sign of a potential problem, quite often what I see in a home inspection report is, hey, I noticed a crack in the stucco. You might want to investigate that further, but from the size of the crack and what I see, you either have no problem at all, this is common to Florida, or there's a risk of catastrophic collapse, right? I mean, there's two sides of that sometimes really drive realtors crazy and buyers crazy because you have to be subjective in your opinion of what it is or your recommendation of further pursuit of investigation. There are some home inspectors out there that will literally take a hairline crack in stucco and say possible risk of catastrophic collapse. And, you know, it's just crazy. I've seen it. I mean, it's unbelievable. Or they'll look at some termite damage on a 2x6 in the attic, and they'll say something like, possibility of major structural issue with the trusses, have a structural engineer come out and give you a report on it, right? And then I've also seen, just to top it off with the third one, there'll be some mildew in a bathroom, right? We know if you live in Florida, everyone's got mildew in their bathroom, usually in like your grout cracks or maybe around the ceiling, you know, where it's not getting good ventilation. And they'll say, you know, mold remediation inspection should occur or something like that on the report. And so it just drives us crazy, because it's like, you know, here's a guy who sometimes people think, okay, this guy knows a lot and he knows everything that's going on in this house, but he didn't investigate the mold to know whether or not it was really mold or mildew. He's not a structural engineer, so he doesn't know if the trusses need to be replaced. He's not a structural engineer and doesn't know if catastrophic collapse is imminent. But when they read that in the report, they think it's the gospel, right? They think, oh no, this house is really, really bad, and I got to bail on this deal right now. You know, so what's that fine line between, you know, putting something in a report that's going to be helpful to a buyer versus just totally blowing a deal up?
Yeah. So as a home inspector, I'm always walking this fine line. Then the line on one side of the line is educating that client, that home buyer, that investor on the potential or the actual defects of the home. And the other side of that line is going too far and freaking everybody out, like you explained. So my job as a home inspector is to relay the information that I see, and let the professionals, or you guys as real estate agents, let you guys, after that information is provided, to evaluate and get further evaluation from professionals like roofers, plumbers, whatever the trade is, and go from there. What I don't want to do as a home inspector is dramatize unnecessarily the defects and scare that buyer away from the home unnecessarily. Some home inspectors have ego problems, and that shows in their reports, like you mentioned.
Yeah, do you have a lot of cases where buyers kind of want to like hang right with you while you're doing an inspection and want kind of like a walking narrative as you look at a property? I mean, I imagine that could lead to some issues too, as you know, as a buyer, you know, tries to really dig in or pick your brain for all the possible problems that could arise. Maybe that's just inquisitiveness and diligence. But on the other hand, you know, like, you know, you probably see that kind of thing happening from time to time. And, you know, what does that suggest to you when that happens?
So I run into that buyer regularly, that buyer that wants to shadow me and follow me at every turn I make. And typically when that happens, they'll hang with me during the exterior inspection. They'll ask me some questions. They may or may not come on the roof. I don't want them to do that for liability purposes, but it does happen. But usually within that first 30 minutes, as we're talking and as we're looking and as I'm explaining, they start to get comfortable with me, and there's a level of trust that comes up, and they usually get bored and they'll go look at the rest of the house, and they'll leave me alone. And having that buyer there on my hip asking questions is kind of can be distracting. So I don't mind them asking questions and seeing what I'm doing. But after they get that level of comfort and they settle down, most of them go to do other things and leave me to do my job. Once they're comfortable and they trust me, that doesn't become a problem. That's my experience.
Good. That's good to know, because as a seller of properties, I don't want a buyer necessarily influencing an inspector, right? I don't want them like pushing for certain problems to emerge, you know, that, and like insisting that certain things we mentioned in the report that maybe aren't, you know, dramatizing them more for his advantage to use against me as a seller, right? I want an objective report as much as possible, one that isn't influenced by the emotions of a buyer who's just looking to get, you know, a cheaper price on a sale, right? So that's good to know that that a professional inspector will, try to make that distance as appropriate as possible.
Right. So on that note, I get regularly the agent or the buyer that comes to me and says, "Hey, JB, this seller is being a real jerk, or they're being real difficult, or we're paying too much for this house. We really want you to nitpick this house." And I'll accommodate that to a certain degree, but I am really consistent in my inspection process. So it really doesn't make any difference whether they tell me or ask me to nitpick a home. I'm going to give them all the defects in the inspection report and in our final talk at the end of the inspection. So that really doesn't influence me a lot when that real estate agent or that buyer tell me that.
So in that vein, what are some of the common issues that you do uncover that are legitimate issues that are found in homes, all over this area that may end up holding up a deal or being something that's really significant that you would recommend the buyer needs to have the seller fix it, or they need to fix it themselves before they put anybody in this house or occupy it themselves? Like it's a life safety issue, or it's something that's overwhelmingly affecting the value of the property.
Right. So the type and the extent of the defect or the expense that you're going to incur because of a certain problem with the home, it's really age dependent. So in newer homes, say 20 years old or less, the potential problems, big problems that are going to need to be addressed or could come up that could hold up a deal, or roof age. So if you've got a 20-year-old home and a multi-dimensional shingle on that home, that roof is near the end of its life and may be leaking at that time. So that's a big potential cost, and could be tens of thousands of dollars to replace that roof. So that's a common thing. Going into that type of transaction, most people already know that the age of the roof, and it's no surprise when that happens. What is a big surprise is when you have maybe a 10 or 12-year-old roof that has significant problems and is leaking. And that's where I come in. I'm going to go through every part of that attic I can and find that leak, because you're going to want to know. Other types of problems in newer homes could be original construction defects. Even new construction or maybe a year or two old, I find roof problems all the time. Electrical and plumbing is generally good on new homes, so that's generally not a problem. But older HVAC systems, foundational issues can all be significant problems on new homes. Now, older homes, let's say late 60s homes can have what we call aluminum branch wiring. And in the late 60s, when copper got really expensive, they substituted that copper for aluminum in the wiring in the home. The problem with aluminum branch wiring, single strand branch wiring, is that aluminum contracts and expands more than copper does. So in those connections throughout your home at the switches and the plugs, those connections get loose and can cause arcing, and arcing can cause fires. So in that era of home, you're really going to want that inspector to find that aluminum branch wiring if it's there. Older homes, 1950s homes and older, can have galvanized steel supply piping and galvanized steel supply piping throughout the home. What happens is that pipe corrodes from the inside out. It's like an artery that's clogging up, and over time you can have reduced flow and even leaks as that pipe rusts through. So galvanized steel piping is a big problem. In the 90s, the plumbing industry came out with this new fancy flexible piping called polybutylene. So in the late 80s and 90s homes, you'll find it's often in higher end homes, because that was the polybutylene was the space age type piping, and it really went into these nice executive homes. But polybutylene piping reacts with the chemicals in the drinking water and breaks down over time and cracks and you'd have massive water damage from those homes. So in that area, you're going to want to know about that type of piping. Older homes with cast iron drain piping can be a nightmare. Cast iron drain piping is susceptible to collapse, separation at the joints, and tree roots get in these pipes and absolutely clog them up. So anytime I see cast iron drain piping in a home, I'm going to recommend one of those camera snakes to evaluate that piping. Aside from that, AC systems that are at the end of their life are not working. Structural problems really aren't too common in our area. If you get up into the Spring Hill area, maybe in the Pasco and Hernando County area, you can run into significant sinkhole issues. So it's those types of big problems that can hold up a deal. And when they happen, nobody likes to hear about it, but that buyer really needs to know. The seller needs to be aware. And so those conversations can happen to either give you that credit for repiping the home, or give you that credit for the roof, or have that seller make those repairs before closing.
That is a lot. I mean, that's a long list of like things that blow up deals. I had chatting to someone the other day, and they're like, I'm petrified of my house. I'm afraid all the time that something's going to blow up or collapse or fail or flood. And I'm like, after that list, I get it. I mean, that's a horrible list of possible problems. So what is the worst thing, the craziest thing, the most entertaining thing you've ever seen? I mean, surely you've got some interesting stories to tell about what you've observed out there in the field.
I do. I see. The biggest thing is the bad flips. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about. You go into this, or the buyer, say I'm a first-time home buyer, and I go into this 1970s, 80s home, and it's beautiful inside. All the cabinets are redone. It's been painted, new flooring, new everything. But I see, original electrical panel, original plumbing. That's really not entertaining, but that's the biggest thing that really rubs me, how the flippers make these beautiful homes that are just chaos underneath. But kind of the more interesting things that I've seen, I don't know if other inspectors have this, but I find dead cats everywhere. If it's a crawl space home, I'm almost expecting to find a dead cat in various stages of decomposition. I did a Seminole Heights bungalow 1920s home a few months ago, and there was this perfectly preserved mummified cat in the crawl space. Another Seminole Heights home, it was a 1920s home, had a big hole in the roof, been leaking for years, and just right under that hole, I don't know what happened, but a dead cat sitting right there on the second floor. Other things, I just see, Chase and Peter, you guys probably see this. I'll do insurance inspections on rental properties, and it's just terrible living conditions. It's not entertaining, but it's shocking when you see it. I've seen marijuana grow rooms. I see that pretty regularly. I've not seen an active one because they know I'm coming, and they get out. You guys talked about a grow house in one of your previous episodes. But
we've seen it. Yes.
Yeah. Some of these people are really good at hiding these things. So I did a home. It was in South Tampa. One of the bedrooms just looked a little too small. So I started looking around, and I found this little access hatch. Open the access hatch, and there was this little hallway type thing. And so I wiggled in there and got in there, and sure enough, there was the bunks with potting soil and evidence of lights. So yeah, those are some of the weird things I've seen. But the cats, I don't know what it is with the dead cats.
That is a strange one. I wonder. I mean, well, they're everywhere. We ran into a community the other day that has this dense feral cat population. It's somewhere in Temple Terrace. I won't tell it out of protection for those who live there. But my sense is that there are cats everywhere. in town. And so it's not surprising they're showing up dead and mummified in your homes. Or rats, I wonder too. I wonder, it seems like I heard another story the other day about someone replacing insulation in their attic. And when they put on the vacuum, they sucked out the old insulation, they would hear thump, thump, and every time they heard one of those thumps, the guy replacing the insulation is like, that's a dead rat that we're sucking out from the deep inside the insulation in your attic. So, we think our homes are sanctuaries and free from all kinds of pests. But I think it's the Bible that says that lizards or spiders are small creatures, but they live in king's palaces. So if lizards and spiders are in king's palaces, then we have rats and cats in ours, unbeknownst to us.
That's right.
Well, good stuff. Well, tell me more about your relationship with insurance companies, because you do 4-point inspections, you do insurance inspections, I know, and so talk to me a little bit about those kinds of inspections and how those connect to classic home inspections that you do.
Right. So in Florida, insurance companies require additional things from home buyers and homeowners when getting a homeowner's insurance policy. So one of those things is the 4-point insurance inspection. The 4-point insurance inspection is intended to evaluate the condition of the 4 major systems of the home. And the 4 major systems are roof, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. So if you're buying a home, or if you're changing insurance policies and your home is over roughly 15 years old now, your insurance company is going to require an inspector to do a 4-point insurance inspection for you. And that aspect of the business has really been shaken up here in the last few years with all the fraudulent, let's call them, or questionable roof claims that are going on. Insurance companies have really lost their shirt. Some have gone bankrupt, the private insurers. So all those insured people are having to find new insurance. And some of the other insurance companies are just pulling out of Florida altogether and not covering those homes. So the demand for those insurance inspections has really gone through the roof. So I'm doing a lot of those. But as an investor or a buyer, it's really important to have an idea of what that 4-point inspection process is. So if you're buying an older home and it has a 15 to 20-year-old roof, your insurance options are going to be limited. Most private carriers are not wanting to insure any roof over 15 years old. If you have that aluminum branch wiring that we talked about, they're not going to like that either, and you may have to remediate or have that aluminum wiring remediated. Certain brands of electrical panels, older electrical panels, a lot of insurance companies won't insure those at all. And if they do insure them, your rates are going to be significant. So
remind me what some of those brands are. I think one was like Federal.
Yeah,
I'm blanking on it.
No,
There's a couple of key brands.
Federal Pacific.
Federal Pacific. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a company who's in business from maybe the 50s through the 70s. Mm-hmm. That brand, and there's Zinsco.
Zinsco, that's right.
Brand panels. They were bought out by Sylvania. Sylvania just took their design and put their name on it. There's a couple others. Challenger came along later in the 90s, and some of their breakers won't trip when they need to, and they cause fires.
All these panels just have histories of being risk prone, and so insurance companies are requiring that these panels be replaced or the electrical systems upgraded if you have these in your home in order to write insurance. Is that generally the gist?
In some cases, here lately, I've been hearing that Citizens will insure those older panels, but you're paying way more on your premium. So that's a good conversation to have, or it's good information to have before you close on that home. Am I going to have to replace that electrical panel, or am I going to have to pay significantly more on my premium just to have that panel? So it's a calculation that is good to do before you close on that home. So maybe you can negotiate the credit or even get that panel replaced.
Without a doubt. And so tell me also about wind mitigation. That's another inspection that needs to happen for insurance. And what is it, and why does it matter so much these days?
The wind mitigation process came about after one of the big hurricanes, and I'm blanking on which one that was, but I think it was in the 90s or early 2000s. That big hurricane came through, and the insurance companies had to cover all this damage. And what I hear is basically they were going to go under and not insure Florida at all. So the state of Florida put in a process to appease these insurance agents to where they could charge their typical or higher rates for Florida because of the additional hurricane risk. But if the home had certain features, those insured people could get discounts on their home insurance premium. Now, those features have to do with the age of the roof. So in 2002, the building codes changed in Florida to improve lots of features of the home that help it resist high winds more. So if your home is newer than 2002, you typically can get a discount on your home insurance premium. If you have an older home, but you have a newer roof, newer than 2002, that was updated to the new standards and holds up to winds better, you get a discount for that. If you have a hip roof is basically a roof that has no gables, has none of the triangle gables on the front or the rear of the home, but it's fully hip. It sheds the wind better and doesn't catch as much wind. If you have hurricane straps or clips hold the roof structure down to the wall and keep that roof from blowing off. Will help keep that roof from blowing off. So you can get a premium discount for that. There's a new technology. It's not too new. It's been around about maybe 15 years, called a secondary water barrier. So instead of the tar paper that typically goes under the shingles or has gone under the shingles in the past, you can put down a peel and stick membrane. And the insurance company likes that because if all your shingles blow off, you still have basically a roof under a roof. It's going to keep that water out. And then lastly, if you have impact rated windows and doors in your home, you can get a premium discount for that as well.
Now, my sense of that one is that you have to have them all hurricane rated. It can't just be a couple or the majority, but it has to be 100% of them in order to get that particular discount. Am I correct on that? Or do you know enough about that integration with insurance regs?
Yeah, Peter, you're exactly right. So just for instance, I did a home inspection or a wind mitigation inspection for a client yesterday. Showed up to the house. He was excited. He just got his new impact rated windows installed. And I walked up to his front door. He had a side light on the door, and I tapped on it. And I said, "They didn't do your door and your side lights, did they?" He said, "No, why?" I said, "To get your discount on your premium for impact rated windows, every piece of glass in the home has to be impact rated." So we talked about some of his options. The options alternatives to installing impact windows, you can install impact rated covers. You may have seen the newer homes that have the bolts sticking out of the sides of the windows. Those are for impact rated panels that cover the windows that you can install when a hurricane's coming. Those will get you a discount. They also make the newer thing is Kevlar covers. They roll up like a map. They're easy to store in your garage and easy to install. They're basically bulletproof fabric that install just like those metal covers. And that counts and can get you that discount. What doesn't count anymore is plywood. So if you have all these sheets of cut plywood in your garage, you're not going to get a discount on your home insurance premium for that anymore.
So interesting. So inspectors will be hired to do an inspection like what you described, a 4-point or a wind mit, by a client, but there's no formal relationship necessarily between inspectors and insurance companies to do these kinds of things. This is just something a homeowner can do on their own by independently retaining you to certify various aspects of their property. Am I correct? Or is there a formal relationship at play?
There is no formal relationship between the insurance agent or the insurance company and the home inspector that's doing these 4-point or wind mitigation inspections. So if you're a homeowner and your insurance has doubled or whatever the crazy increase lots of people have gotten over the past few years, you can shop for insurance. When you shop for insurance, you can go to these different agents, and they often will give you a list of inspectors that they recommend to do these 4-point and wind mitigation inspections. But we're, as home inspectors, technically a third party given a unbiased evaluation of the home and its features, wind mitigation features.
Great stuff. So let me ask then, it's kind of like sort of a wrap-up question or two, but you're a seller of a property. You want to get out ahead of any kinds of problems that might come out of an inspection process, because you know that almost every seller or every buyer is going to be advised to get a home inspection. What can a seller do to get in front of problems that might be in their home, maybe unbeknownst to them, maybe that they know about? And, how do they avoid being, how do you avoid being strong-armed by a buyer who comes equipped with JB and Buyer's Guide Home Insurance, this incredibly robust insurance, I should say inspection report that's going to, put the fear of God into that person. So talk to me a little bit about what sellers can do and how they can avoid that kind of pressure tactic from a well-armed buyer.
So my first recommendation in that regard is to make sure you're working with a wise and seasoned real estate agent to sell your home. A good real estate agent is going to already be educated in the inspection process and know what to look for. That listing agent should know the age of your roof. That's the biggest one. That's the biggest one in today's market. Knowing the age of your roof and how much life can expect to get out of that roof, because that home inspector is going to probably do a 4-point inspection. And if you don't have at least 3 years of life left on that roof, you're going to have problems. You're either going to have to come off of a credit when selling that home, or you're going to need to install a new roof. So for sellers and for real estate agents, definitely want to know the age of that roof. If you have an older home, you're going to want to know what types of plumbing you have. If you have galvanized steel piping, or if you have polybutylene piping, that buyer is going to have trouble insuring that home. And those types of piping come along with their risks, and buyers are going to want to minimize the risk. So at least know what kind of piping you have, and get an evaluation or get an estimate of what the repairs cost would be on that. You're going to want to know, like we talked about earlier, the brand of electrical panel you have. If you have one of those brands that is not going to be insurable and is dangerous, you're going to want to prepare yourself for that potential cost, that repair that you may have to do. What else? Cast iron plumbing. We talked about that. Those are the big things. It's basically the 4-point type things that you're going to want to know the condition of your home. In the market in the last few years, if you could pass a 4-point, you're out of that neck of the woods of having a deal fall through because some aspect of the condition of your home.
Yeah, that's been my experience too recently, is like, when I'm working with buyers and we go into a property, anything that's going to fail the 4-point is almost looked as like a non-negotiable. Like, the seller's got to fix this, because at the end of the day, if you can't insure the property, you typically can't close on it, at least if you're using any kind of financing whatsoever. And that seems to be like the low bar, right? It's like, we got to pass the 4-point. That's the minimum, right? And if you can't do that, we're going to want that stuff fixed so we can pass that inspection. And then everything else on top of that, is all negotiable, right? I mean, typically it's like, that's where the gravy comes in. Am I really paying the price for what I'm getting and the condition of the home, or are some of these things a deal breaker for me?
Right.
So I'm curious then, Chase, maybe you have more comments on this as, as a experienced broker. Is it better in these kinds of environments where you have a home that has deficiencies, maybe plumbing deficiencies, electrical panel deficiencies, things that are going to be expensive for a buyer to replace, but maybe a seller doesn't want to replace them all? But what you don't want, right, is anyone to be surprised by a home inspection, right? You want them to know that here are the problems with this home. So would it be better to disclose those, right? As a seller, you're going to disclose all the things that you know. Maybe you're going to get a home inspection yourself before you sell a home. And then you're going to say, this home has got cast iron pipes and they're not going to be repaired. It has a Federal Pacific panel and it's not going to be upgraded. You're going to need to get a quote from Citizens to insure that property. Is that a course of action that would be prudent to take? Be very open about what the deficiencies are so that there's no one shocked and then trying to bring in this unexpected inspection report to try and get more money out of the deal or force your hand to make repairs.
Well, one thing that's interesting in that regard is, what you're required to do as a seller in the state of Florida, right? It's like, you're required to fill out that seller property disclosure form. And every question on that form is predicated on what you as a seller actually know about your property, which is why one of the acceptable answers to every question is, I don't know. If you go out and get a preemptive home inspection, you're going to know now, and you've got to go back and either correct your form or re-answer all those questions stating what you now know to be the truth about that property. It's probably, dependent upon the property and, your negotiation with the type of buyer you're going to get for that property. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to sell their property at a below market price per se, because they know there are potential issues, right? What those issues are, they kind of leave that up to the buyer to uncover. Then there's other people out there that want to get top dollar for their property. And so like, if I was going to go and sell the home that I live in now, that I personally, built and oversaw construction of, and know that it is built to a superior quality than most of the other stuff out there, I'll gladly go get a preemptive home inspection and make sure that home inspector highlights all of those premium quality features that I put into the house, because a buyer's home inspector isn't going to know that and isn't going to do that. But I've got all the documents and the records to back that up to show, hey, look, here's what you're actually getting. So I think there may be two sides to that coin, depending upon both the property you have and also the kind of buyer you're going to attract.
That's interesting approach. And JB, would you agree that by getting that inspection report, you're opening yourself up to that extra, burden of responsibility that now you do know, right? You've got another professional vouching for the condition, and whatever kind of things he discloses to you need to be now disclosed in that seller's disclosure.
Yeah, I think so. I run into this regularly. I think it's better to know beforehand as a seller, because if you don't get that information and you truly don't know, it's going to come up in that buyer's home inspection report. You're going to have to deal with it on the back end. So I do offer pre-listing inspections, and I do them pretty regularly for diligent sellers that don't want any surprises. When I do that pre-listing inspection, I'll identify all the defects and potential problems that would come up as if I was representing a buyer. And those sellers, they either want to fix those problems before the house goes to market, or they want to be totally transparent and provide the potential buyer with that home inspection report, just for the sake of transparency. I think that's a great way to go. And like Chase said, you are opening yourself up to what you have to disclose on that seller's property disclosure. But it's kind of like, if that buyer's inspector is going to find that defect anyway, it's not a bad idea to get that out in the open beforehand.
Yeah, I guess from an investor standpoint, like myself selling investment properties, the one thing I'm always a little skeptical of, right, is how the home inspector is going to portray that particular issue, right? I mean, if I own a house in Seminole Heights and everyone knows it was built in the 50s, and they come in and they're like, oh, there's cast iron pipes here. I'm like, Of course there's cast iron pipes here. What did you expect? I mean, it's built in the 50s, but they work perfectly fine. Send a camera down there, versus another home inspector may be like, oh, got to replace that. That's a hazard to your health or something, got to get that out of there. Whereas maybe I've priced the home to account for the fact that it's in original condition. I haven't spent $5-6 grand, replacing drain lines and supply lines and things like that. But all the life safety issues, they're intact. I've redone the electrical panel. I've got grounded outlets. I've got GFCI outlets. I've got a new roof on the property. We've got a good HVAC system and all that stuff. So I think some of this question, at least for me, is always like, well, who do I trust, right? And maybe it is a good idea for me to get a preemptive inspection because I trust someone like you to present the situation accurately versus relying on that buyer to bring someone in who's going to just advocate for me to reduce my price or have to do additional repairs. And so definitely something to think about as a seller because, it never hurts to know. And you want to make sure that the information is presented in the right light based on the kind of property you're selling and the price you're asking for it.
Yeah.
So,
Chase, I'm sorry, JB, go ahead.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I just want to give a little advice to investors out there. And my advice is to try to establish a relationship with a good inspector. When I work with investors, I try to educate them on what to look for so they don't get wrapped up in a property that's going to cost them way more than they thought it was going to cost to rehab. So my good investor clients know they can call me at any time, and they often call me before they enter into a contract, and I can do what Chase called as a test drive. I can go through that property before they make an offer on the home and give them that high level view of the condition of the major components of the home, and maybe help them avoid wasting their time and their earnest money and all the headache that would come with getting under contract on a home that they're not going to buy. And I can help them avoid that. And the investors that I work with, I'll often just do a complimentary drive-by on a home. And when I have time to meet them there to go over those things, and it takes 15 to 30 minutes for me to get that high level evaluation done. And it can save those clients a lot of time and headache of getting under contract on a home that they have no business buying.
I like it. I like what we're saying right now because the perspective is really that the truth sets us free, right? Scripture tells us that. And what we were talking about here is empowering ourselves with truth. And then the next step is, what's your strategy based upon that truth? Because if you know that you've got issues, then what are you going to do when the likely event comes and someone makes a demand or an expectation based upon that truthful information? Having that strategy in place probably will help you avoid any kind of feeling of being cornered in your activities or forced to do something that you don't want to do. You've got a strategy in place for how to act if someone demands something now based upon the knowledge that exists, that you can't deny exists. It's empirical, right? So, well, JB, this has been an excellent conversation. Where can our listeners go to learn more?
So my website is buyersguidehomeinspection.com. On that website, you can see all my pricing. I'm fully upfront with my pricing. There's an online scheduling tool where you can see my availability and schedule a home inspection. You can call my office. It's 813-212-4419. And I offer full home inspections with a 4-point wind mitigation inspections. I also do WDO and termite inspections in-house.
Beautiful. Well, the mission of Buying Tampa Bay, our podcast, is to equip you, our listeners, with the information you need to generate real wealth in Tampa Bay real estate. If we're doing that for you, please give us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast, and tell all your friends about us. That really helps. And if you're ready to start investing in real estate in Tampa Bay, reach out to your favorite Buying Tampa Bay host via email, peter@homeprop.com or chase@homeprop.com. And please, someone don't make me feel bad about not being your favorite. I know Chase's box is going to blow up with all kinds of email inquiries, and he's going to get a really big head about that. So until next time, email one of us, invest wisely, and remember what Virgil said, fortune favors the bold. So go do something bold and brave this week.